to go a totally different direction. And
Okay.
so, do you think I have a speech impediment or not? Honestly, so is anyone ever listening and you're having a speech impediment problem, you know, don't give up because you can be like me and you're giving a podcast interview
Right.
and everyone hears you just fine. The information in the podcast is not intended or implied to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Please talk to a medical professional before doing anything that may impact your health. Hello, welcome to my podcast, To Mike Fun Joey Suits. I am Joey Suits, and I'll be giving a mic to Kelly Conway. She currently has seronegative rheumatoid
Rheumatoid
arthritis
arthritis.
and now polyarticular
Polyarticular spondyloarthropathy. Say that
Thank
5 times
you.
fast. Uh-huh.
I also has Graves' disease,
Mhm.
fibromyalgia,
Fibromyalgia and
renin
DSEP.
deficient hypertension,
Yep.
and disseminated superficial actinic
Yeah.
paracarditis, DSAP,
Yep.
on a daily basis. Recently, we mentioned arthritis. She had a
Mhm.
blog called At the Joint Turn. I love the name, by the way.
Thank you.
She is the co-founder of International Foundation, AI Arthritis. She is currently a speech language pathologist who specializes in both autism and augmentative and alternative communication. Also a proud dog owner. Welcome to the podcast. How are you?
Thank you. I'm glad to be here, Joey. Thanks for asking me.
Yeah, it was a lot of words that I don't know who came up with these names. Like,
Good thing I'm a speech therapist. I work those things out. It's hard for me to say them.
yes.
But it's interesting. It's such long. I've had a long storied history of my diagnoses changing. So you never know what it's going to be next week. I never know.
Well, I know from my research that you were actually diagnosed with something else way back, and then I guess something happened or the symptoms weren't. So let's talk about that. So what did you have before, and then how did you become diagnosed with what you have now?
Okay, well, my symptoms started when I was about 14. So most likely I had juvenile arthritis, but it didn't show up in my blood, which usually rheumatoid arthritis does. But since it doesn't churn up in my blood, they say it's, the seronegative. And I have periods of time where my rheumatic factor is high, but it's not consistent. However, I have very swollen, red hot joints. I have all the autoimmune kind of symptoms that go with it. So when I was 14, they kept telling me I had tendinitis, and I even had surgery at 19 to repair what they thought was a tear in my ligaments. They kept treating me for like tendinitis and swollen joints and ligaments. And they went in to operate and there was nothing wrong. There was just inflammation. So that was when I was 19. And then I got really sick around age 22, 23. And they told me I had fibromyalgia. But I had a lot of autoimmune symptoms. Like I was running fevers, I had swollen joints, I couldn't really move. So it went away. They told me to exercise more. I'll never forget that. They're like, you need to exercise more. And I'm like,
Okay.
I can barely move. And then off and on, I always had the knee flared up. I treated it as tendinitis. Every once in a while, my hands would hurt. And then I got diagnosed with my first autoimmune disease at 28, 29 with Graves' disease, which is a thyroid disease. And the endocrinologist said, once you get diagnosed with one autoimmune disease, you tend to get diagnosed with others. And literally within 2 years, they were trying to figure out if I had lupus or rheumatoid arthritis. So it was always kind of back and forth between lupus, rheumatoid arthritis, or psoriatic arthritis. So they kind of treat me for all because a lot of the symptoms are very similar. And depending on what medication treatment I need, my doctor might change my diagnoses so I can try a new drug. But that's it. It took from 14 when my symptoms onset until I was 32 to get any sort of diagnosis or treatment. So
how did you, like, what triggered you to be re-diagnosed? Like, did the doctor say it's something isn't adding up, or you had guess?
I slowly over a period of time went from being someone who, walked a few miles a day. I worked out. I was very busy. I had very active social life, to someone who could barely function. Like I could barely get out of bed. I was having a hard time doing things like brushing my teeth, getting dressed. They would run tests and everything would come back negative. I had biopsies. I had all kinds of stuff. And I remember I thought I saw a doctor who was my last hope. And I went to see her and she sent me a letter in the mail that said, your blood work is clinically insignificant. And I remember reading it and literally falling to the floor and crying because I'm like, they must think I'm crazy. But how can I fake? I had 13 or 14 swollen joints. And I was like, there has to be something wrong with me. So that was a Friday. I told nobody because everybody in my family and friends were like, did you hear from the doctor? I'm like, no, I didn't hear anything because I thought they were going to think I was crazy. So that Monday I got home from work and there was a voicemail back in the day when there were still answering machines. And it was like,
Oh, what's
hi.
that?
Yeah, it was like, hi, this is Dr. So-and-so. We have to apologize. You received a letter from us in error. Not all of your blood work had come back and you tested positive. Your ANA level was raised and I tested positive for something called Sjogren's syndrome. So I went in and I had the eye test and the biopsy, and both of them came back negative, but they began treating me for Sjogren's syndrome. And Sjogren's syndrome is often like a piggyback disease. It piggybacks onto rheumatoid arthritis or lupus. It can be a standalone disease, but a lot of times it kind of goes with that. It's clinically like clinical dryness in your mouth and your eyes. I never had that, but I had all the joint pain that was associated with it. So that was sort of my stepping stone into the world of finally getting treated. And I would say it took about 7 years to find medication that really did work for me. But I'm somewhere in that realm. So that's why I tend to use the phrase autoimmune arthritis, because I'm never 100% sure what I do have. But it hurts and it's causing destruction to my joints. So I think I probably have rheumatoid arthritis, but you never really certain.
I'm just assuming, have you taken all the tests to be able to diagnose it, or is it something you can't really just test?
No, they did. It just doesn't come up in my blood, but there's, I guess, diagnostic tools that they can rule out. So yeah, like I said, my first doctor thought I was going to end up with lupus, and she used to say that to me all the time. You're very lupus-like. And then
Okay.
when I was about 36 or 37, that's when they first started saying rheumatoid arthritis. So it's kind of sort of stuck, and every once in a while they'll change it to the polyarticular spondyloarthropathy or spondyloarthropathy. So whether it's autoimmune or autoinflammatory, I do have it. So that's why they treat me.
Yeah, but so I wanted to ask, so I've been interviewing a lot of younger people, and you're older person that's been diagnosed with this stuff. How is it different in the medical community now versus, let's say, 20 years ago?
Okay. Well, it's interesting. I grew up with my Aunt Shirley had rheumatoid arthritis, and my parents' next door neighbor had rheumatoid arthritis. So I knew what it was as a kid, where a lot of times when people say, oh, I have rheumatoid arthritis, everybody goes, oh, I have that too. I have some arthritis in my knee. But again, rheumatoid arthritis and osteoarthritis are two very different things, both painful, but both impact the body in different ways. I have a systemic disease that impacts not only my joints, but also my skin, my heart. It's systemic. It affects the whole body, where osteoarthritis really just wears down the joints, which is extremely painful. And there's really no treatment for osteo until it's time for a joint replacement. where there are treatments for the disease that I have. So growing up, when they started throwing out the term rheumatoid arthritis, I got very scared because I remembered seeing my neighbor's toes crossed, and I remembered how much pain my Aunt Shirley was in and how her joints deformed. So I was petrified. I do think the medications are the big reason why I don't have joints as deformed as they did, as I think the treatments are a lot better than they were back then. I think treatments are so much better, but I think there is a slight disconnect. And I think I talked about this in the talk that you heard me speaking in. You know, medications come out and they are groundbreaking and they are life-changing and they make a huge difference in my life, but I'm still in pain. So when a doctor sees me and he sees, well, my joints aren't deteriorating and my blood work looks good, they're saying, oh, the patient's doing great, but I'm still in a lot of pain and there's still a lot of things I can't do on a regular basis. So I think now there are, like back in the day, I don't think I got a diagnosis because it just didn't turn up in my blood. Didn't mean I didn't have every other symptom having to do with it. So I think for many, many years, I wasn't treated. And I think that's why I have such a hard time walking now, because I think the joints went too long without getting what they needed. And so some of that can't be repaired at this point.
So just to be clear, the rheumatoid arthritis is the swelling of your joints and muscle pains?
Yeah, rheumatoid arthritis is an autoimmune disease. And the disease, basically, my body can't tell the difference between good cells and bad cells. So my body attacks itself and wears down the lining of the tissues around my joints. So it's a connective tissue disease. And my joints, I leak something called little bits of synovial fluid, which leaks out under my ligaments. So I have little bumps under my ligaments between like my bone and my ankles. So that's part of the reason why I swell so much, because I have all of this. The fluid around my joints is slowly leaking out, basically. So it's painful.
So now the question is, what do you do to relieve it?
I take a biologic drug, which slows down the production of the bad cells and allows me to live a somewhat comfortable life. So I have good days, I have bad days. It is systemic, so it will flare. I can't really go in the sun anymore. It does impact my life, like certain things. Like I can't really, if I go out on a boat, I have to be really careful because I can't be in the sun because the medicine would make me really sick. I've taken even mild doses of chemotherapy to slow down the progression of the disease. So it's all about slowing it down so it doesn't go full force on your body, because it can lead to heart disease. I've had some issues with my joints and my heart, my arteries, things like that, where the disease just really, some of the treatments have caused some issues as well. So it's all encompassing. It takes up a lot of time and a lot of energy to stay on top of it. So there are treatments, there's physical therapy, there's medical treatments, acupuncture, there's all kinds of things that I've done over the years.
Has anything worked? Are you into like healing crystals? Have you tried those?
I have. It's funny. I did more of that with my dog than I did for myself. But I have tried. I've done everything from Reiki to acupuncture to I've done every diet on the planet. I've eliminated where I was basically eating like water and sand at one point, trying to figure out if it was food based. Had
anything worked?
Not long enough. Like I did a gluten-free, and I'm talking like 20 years ago, I went gluten-free. And I was miserable because I missed some of that food. And I didn't feel better. If I felt better, I would have never gone back, but I really didn't feel a significant amount better that I thought it was worth, searching for foods that were free of everything. Some people, it works great. For me, I wasn't overly thrilled. So I try and avoid a lot of dairy. I try and avoid foods that I think can be inflammatory, like fried foods, things like that. And I do try and stick with foods that can cause decreased inflammation and high in antioxidants. But yeah, no, nothing. It's like I said, it's a disease that attacks various parts of my body. So I've been taking a biologic drug now since maybe 2006. I've been on a few different ones, and I did go off of it in 2010 thinking it wasn't really working. And I have to be honest, when I went back on, I was like, wow, it's like day and night. So it does make me feel much, much better.
So do you take pain medication on top of that, or is it your pain medication?
Rheumatoid arthritis causes something in the morning called you get like extreme stiffness, like my back and my hips and my legs kind of lock up. So it takes me sometimes over an hour to be able to get up in the morning. So I do take one pain pill every morning. I take a mild tramadol just to sort of help me get up and move. As the day goes on, I loosen up and it gets a little easier, but it is really, really hard sometimes to get up.
So do you have like days where you just like put your feet up in the air and just let it?
Yeah. Well, there's days when my feet swell so much I can't get shoes on.
Wow.
Yeah. And it drives me crazy. I'm like, I can't believe I can't go to work because I can't put on shoes.
It's just amazing that you are living this kind of life. So is it so that you're getting worse as you get older? Mm-hmm. Would it have helped if you let's say to stay in a wheelchair and not use your muscles, or?
Well, no, I think like right now I'm going to be 52 in a few weeks. So
happy birthday.
Oh, thank you. So, I work in schools. My goal is to make it to 25 years. I've been working a lot longer, but to be in public school, I work in high school and a middle school, but the high school is huge and it's a lot of walking. In the middle school, they're ripping down. So they actually removed the tiles because they had asbestos in them, I guess. So they wanted to remove them so that when we move into the new building in a couple of months, they can just rip down the building quickly to build our parking lots and our sports fields and stuff like that. So I'm walking on cement, and you wouldn't think like the tile versus the cement would make a big difference, but it's awful. And people often say to me, well, why don't you use a scooter or what? And I'm not there yet. I know it's something I could do, but I think for me, most of the time my disease is invisible to other people. I don't look like there's anything wrong with me. But then every once in a while, my joints swell so much I do struggle with walking and I have to use a cane. I work with kids who ask a lot of questions. And even though I feel like I've tried to become more evolved with, being an advocate and speaking for what I need when it comes to being a patient in front of my students, that's a very different thing because I'm not a patient for them. I'm a speech therapist, and I don't want it to ever be about me. And even though walking has nothing to do with being a speech therapist, being able to walk the halls in my high school to get from one room to the other is getting a little bit more challenging. So it's something I'm really considering. What do I do to make it easier? I don't think I'm at a point right now where I'm ready to use a mobility device. I have used it in the past when things got really bad, but I think, for the most part, I have good days and bad. So I try and pace myself. I schedule things where I go from one direction and loop back to where I need to be at the end of the day. And I rest when I get home. So there are days when I come home, my ankles are huge. And there are days when I come home, like today, they're fine. But today I taped myself. My ankle is all taped up. So that helps. So it just depends. It can be very inconsistent because I flare and then I have periods where I feel a lot better. So you just never know.
Well, I mean, I totally support you getting you can get a Segway.
Yeah, I always say that. A few years ago, I broke my foot. I was trying to battle a child with Fortnite dances, and I think I did
Uh-oh.
something, and then walking downstairs, it just snapped. So this was like later, but I think that's what caused it. So I was on a scooter for months and months. And I loved it. I loved it. I had so much fun on it, but it was a big hassle getting everywhere. And crutches are really hard because crutches and canes hurt my wrists. And I've done wheelchairs. When I broke my leg many, many years ago, I broke my leg. The wheelchair was so difficult for me because of my wrists. So, maybe I'll get to a point at some point. I think a lot of what damages my body is working full time. So I used to support my dog who was very sick. I used to work multiple jobs, and this past year I've decided I really needed to stop because it wasn't good for my health and I was making myself worse.
Mhm.
So I don't do that anymore. I just work my one job, and then I tutor a little bit. And then I do my patient advocacy stuff. So this is a year about trying to figure out how to get healthier, both physically and mentally.
I mean, this is also a very hard, unpredictable, challenging year for many people.
It
Just,
is. It is. It's been very challenging. And, um, I had mentioned to you before, I lost multiple family members to COVID. And I have a mom who's very high risk who lives 2 hours away from me. So, being an only child, it's been a lot of me commuting and taking care of things for her, taking care of things for my dad. It's just been a hard, hard year. And I think this year in my advocacy, I did a lot more about mental health because no matter what you turn on the news for, there's something that is just heart wrenching. And, um, everything has gained a political tone. And I feel like a lot of people you just can't talk to about anything because it turns into an argument. And so I really felt like this year for me was a lot about focusing on the here and now, about focusing on what I can do to make my life better at this point. And that was stepping back from always trying to work and pay the bills for the dog. Um, so yeah, it's been a hard year. And now I'm back in schools, and now we have the Delta variant, which I was really hoping we'd go back and things would be on the way to normal.
yeah, we were so close too.
I didn't think we'd get to normal. I thought there would still be some, but I didn't think it would be like this. So as of right now, I'm back in school full time, and I'm very cautious, and I'm getting my booster shot for my vaccine on Thursday. And
Yeah.
hopefully that will protect me, and hopefully it will protect my mom. So that's my worst fear. I'm not as afraid of getting it myself, although I don't think it's pleasant. I'm really afraid of passing it to somebody I care about.
I mean, it's tricky, especially with you since you're with kids and, they're,
Yeah.
and then they spread out and then, like, it keeps going. So,
Yeah. And I work with kids 11 to 21. So those 11-year-olds aren't able to get the vaccine. And I don't know who got the vaccine and who didn't. It's really none of my business. Um, so I don't know. It's just being very cautious.
I mean, I wish you the best and be safe. Yeah, like, you were talking about the news. I have, like, not watched the news in, like, 2 years. And I
Mm.
just feel so much, like, better because the news is made you, it purposely made to make you, like, have a reaction, and it's like not needed.
Yeah, I think there's a difference between knowing what's going on in the world and watching the news. So I do try to know what's going on in the world, but unfortunately that comes via the news. But yeah, it's there's times where I have to take a step back because it can be very overwhelming. And going through the pandemic, and you always think it's never going to happen to you. And then when my dad ended up in the hospital for he needed surgery for a broken hip, I just I honestly, it was my biggest fear, but I kept thinking, no, he's going to be fine. And literally we lost him very quickly. Um, So again, it's a challenge, and I am immunocompromised. The drugs that I take make me even more at risk. So, I just have to be careful. That's why I contacted my rheumatologist and said, what about the booster? Is this something I should consider? Should I wait? What should I do? And she said, you need to get it. She's like, I highly suggest you get it. And I think something that, I'm in a lot of social media groups, and not all patient oriented. One was just like an author group, and somebody posted that they wanted to get the vaccine. And she said, but I'm scared because I have rheumatoid arthritis and I don't know if it's safe. And my rheumatologist told me not to get it, but my regular doctor told me to get it.
Really?
Yeah. So that's when we started doing our own podcast with my nonprofit, AI Arthritis, where, what was our national board saying? So our national board is the American College of Rheumatology, and they basically had everything written out very clearly. And it was interesting to me that rheumatologists in different parts of the country just were not recommending it. And it wasn't that they weren't recommending it to individual patients. It was a blanket statement. So, I can understand people's dismay and fear. But, again, I saw the worst things because my dad didn't go to the hospital for COVID. He went to the hospital for a broken hip and ended up dying from COVID. And yeah, he was 84. He had pre-existing conditions, but he didn't deserve what happened to him. And
oh my God.
And people have made me feel like, well, your father was old. Well, my father was worth a lot to me. And my father was a great guy, and he served his country, and he served in the CIA, and he was a great guy. He didn't deserve that. My uncle didn't deserve that. They went to the hospital because they needed treatment, and they ended up dying from the pandemic. And it's just so unfair. And what's most unfair is they died alone. And that's very difficult.
Yeah, I mean, it's easy to say COVID not bested, but in your case, it's very close to you.
Yeah, it does hit close. And again, I think, I was with somebody today, and person kept taking off their mask, and we're mandated to have to wear them, and kept taking it off. And it's not that I want her to put it on because, but again, I want to be as protected as possible.
Mm-hmm.
And the rule in our building is you have to keep it on. So eventually, I think, picked up on my cues. I didn't want to be like, listen, you're sharing space with me. You got to wear the, but eventually I think this person noticed that, oh, wow, everybody's wearing them in the classrooms. Yes, because that's the rule. And that we made it very clear when this person came into the building. So hopefully I didn't, I didn't want to start a war. It's just an
insane world we live in right now.
It is. It's a hard thing.
So I'm going to go a totally different direction. And
okay.
So, do you think I have a speech impediment or not?
I think you have some slurring, maybe a little dysarthria, but I think it's probably from muscle tone and maybe your body position.
Well,
but I think you're pretty clear, but I can tell sometimes when you moved around, I could hear a little bit more slurring.
Yeah, because I was actually, well, you can't tell by wearing hearing aids.
Okay.
I was born deaf.
Okay.
So I had to spend 15 to 20 years learning how to speak.
Awesome. Well, I didn't pick up on that because your sounds are really pretty good. Usually I have a few students who have hearing impairments, and I can hear it a little bit, but you do sound really good.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I had a really good speech.
Did you do oral rehabilitation, or did you do just regular speech therapy?
What's the difference?
Oral rehab is like learning how to hear sounds. Like, did you have cochlear implants, or do you have more of
I have just hearing aids with some molds.
Okay. Excellent. Yeah, that was actually what I wanted to go into first, was speech therapy for hearing impaired, for deaf and hearing impaired.
Oh yeah, I had it on my list to ask questions. So, but I think more people would be interested about your diagnostics and speech.
Yeah, no, that was actually my first love, and I really wanted to go into that. And then I did my first experience in the deaf community, and it was great. But
Wait, do you know sign language?
I knew a lot more. I took up to like ASL 3 in college, and I did a lot more. But once I started working, where I was living at the time, there wasn't really any opportunities for someone in the hearing impaired community. So I ended up working with kids with autism, and then I ended up just falling in love with working with kids with autism and augmentative and alternative communication. So that's sort of been my focus.
Yeah, when I was reading it, what is alternative communication?
I think it's a form of communication when somebody is not clearly understood, or if they are unable to speak, it's a means in which allowing them to communicate. Whether it's, most people are most familiar with Stephen Hawking, who used a device for many years. So it can be a device, it can be a picture system, it can be texting. It's anything that helps augment somebody's communication style. So whether that's technology, high tech, low tech, and yeah, it's probably one of my biggest passions. As I'm sitting here, my phone is going off, and it's a former student who is now an adult, and she texts me all the time. So for working for her communication goal was that she would be able to text people as she was getting older, and she'd have some sort of way to socially connect, since using a phone wasn't something that was too easy for her. So she texts me about 25 times a day, and I love hearing from her.
Why is the phone difficult for her?
Physically, she has a hard time, and cognitively. But she does a great job with texting. And I don't think, actually, for her age, she didn't want to call. None of my students want to ever talk on the phone. They'll FaceTime, but they won't talk on the phone. It's the funniest thing. So, yeah, so she texts me all the time. I have other students who are completely nonverbal, who, they have a lot to share. And so I try and help them learn how to share their stories and, connect with other people. And it's fantastic. And, I went in 2010, I went to Uganda, Africa, and I helped start an autism program in an orphanage there. And we introduced some augmentative and alternative communication back then. And they're still doing it. And they have a nice little program there in Uganda. So
I'm just surprised that they have it in a public school setting, because when I needed to get speech therapy, I had to go outside for it.
Okay. Yeah. I grew up in Catholic schools, so I think they did have speech, but I had no idea. But no, public schools since 1970 something. I can't think of the year, when IDEA came into effect. That's when it started being open. Now, I do know, depending on where you live, some places, because of funding, don't always have people in certain buildings. Now, I think with lawsuits and, IDEA, everything has to be within the child's homeschool. So that's changed a lot. When I first started working, all of my kids were in approved private schools. So I didn't work in public schools for the first 10 years. And then the school started wanting to make programs in the district, so the kids wouldn't be on buses for an hour. So that's when I moved into public school, and I've been doing it ever since. So
I'm just surprised they had funding for it. Like, there's enough people to warrant the program.
Oh, I have hundreds of kids. I have way too many kids than I'm supposed to. Yeah, I just did, in my 2 buildings, I have over 140 kids. I don't see all of them. I have somebody who helps me see some. But yeah, an average speech therapist has at the minimum of 65 kids in the state of Pennsylvania, at least.
Wow, that's so high. I'm so surprised.
No, that's pretty much the norm. And it's been that way for a long time. And it depends too. Like, it depends on programs. Sometimes certain buildings in the district might have more of a learning support class that is pretty specialized. So kids might have to go to that school, even though it's in the school district. It's too hard to, have a classroom for just one kid when you have a classroom where you can have a few kids together. So they might make them like that. But yeah, no, there's usually speech is a big part of schools.
How do you manage to do 60 kids when, like you mentioned that there's like alternative communication, like everyone kind of has their...
Well, at this point, I have how many kids with? I have, it changes every so many years. So right now, I only have 4 kids using devices. Not all of them use them for communication. Some use them just for accessing technology, accessing their curriculum. And I have 2 young men who will be going off to college or graduating in the spring. So for them, it will be making sure that they can seamlessly navigate their communication systems and their technology so that they can, get a job, they can go to school, they can live very productive lives however they want to. So I don't have a ton right now. A lot of what I do is articulation therapy, language therapy, and I do a lot of social skills therapy.
So you're more like the middle person of helping these kids.
Yeah, well, I'm a related service for most kids, so they might be in school for academic needs. And then if they have a hard time communicating or producing sounds or stuttering, things like that, then I step in and I help with that.
I mean, it must be hard because like when I was learning to speak properly throughout my childhood, like for one, when I was young, I was like stubborn about it.
Mm-hmm.
It's just like I would do the classes and that, but like I really wouldn't put the effort into it.
And it's hard work.
No,
and it's hard work, and it's hard to change habits that become second nature.
Yeah, that was the biggest thing, is that you have a habit of speaking terribly, and like when you speak, you have to like really think about speaking properly.
Mm-hmm. I have a sign in my classroom that says your brain controls your mouth. And you have to stop and think. And that's really the biggest thing. Like I have some kids who have some pretty severe apraxia and dysarthria, and it makes them very hard to understand. And sometimes with breath support and things like that, we can, I can give them all the strategies in the world. They have to put them into use because I can't fix their speech, but I can give them tools to help them fix their speech. Yeah. And I find some kids, especially now in this day and age, kids are they want to be entertained like that, and they want to achieve something like that because it's sort of like a video game kind of world. And so when they've been working for many years on something that they're just not getting, I think it's very frustrating. So I try to be understanding. I work with teenagers, so I think I have a good relationship with them, and they know if I tell them they're done, then, either we're not going to be able to fix it or they're just not trying. So, but I have really good kids. I'm lucky. I have a lot of kids, but they're fantastic.
Yeah, it requires a lot of effort and takes years of practice to become the norm. Like, I don't know what your strategy is, but the last one that I loved the best, she just straight out told me that I suck.
Oh, yeah.
And like you have to like in the real world, like if you're stuttering and stuff, people won't listen to you and all that
right.
stuff.
And it's hard. Everybody has, different feelings about it. Some people claim it doesn't bother them, but when they get to, interested in dating, it becomes a big issue. Some kids get bullied terribly, especially if they have a wonky R. They get bullied a lot. Some people, just obviously think somebody who has a speech issue is maybe not as intelligent. That's not always the case. Just because somebody can't speak doesn't mean they're not highly intelligent. So I think speech is something that people take for granted a lot, but when, it gets impeded, it can make life very hard. So it's honestly, I've never met a speech therapist who doesn't love their job. They don't like the paperwork, but they love the job.
Yeah, I mean, it's great. It just requires a lot of work, and it's just a lot of the work, like you mentioned before, that you can help them like speak properly and such, but a lot of the work is actually done by the person. Like exactly. They have to put the work in, like exactly. They have to practice beforehand.
Exactly.
Like, it kind of like if you're like wanting, It's kind of like if you want to be like a muscle man, the only person that can do it is you.
Exactly. And I have a lot of kids who are in sports. So some play football, some are wrestlers. And I often say to them, do you not work out for that? Because this is something you have to work at. If you want to make it better, you can make it better. It's not going to be easy. So yeah, and I have told some kids, I'm like, you sound like you tell me you think you sound fine. Let's go ask your teachers, and we'll send them emails and say, how does so-and-so sound? And 90% of the time, teachers write back and say, I really don't understand them. And the kids are like, oh. So again, when you want to get a job, you need to speak clearly.
Yeah.
When
Do you ever record them and just play it back?
Mm-hmm.
Like it's like I edit all my videos and stuff. Like I'm a YouTuber, and I edit all the podcasts, and I have to listen to myself for one. I hate listening to myself.
I think everybody does. Yeah, I hate listening to myself.
Yeah, I mean, you get used to it after a while, but I don't know. Like sometimes I'll just think that like, well, I speak really well most of the time, and it's like, so is anyone ever listening, and you're having a speech impediment problem, don't give up, because you can be like me, and you're giving a podcast interview, and everyone hears you just fine.
Yeah, I remember years ago, Dick Clark used to always do the New Year's Eve shows, and he was a famous MC host, and he produced a lot of game shows and a lot of talk shows, and he had a stroke. And the year after he had a stroke, now Ryan Seacrest does it, the New Year's Rockin' Eve, but Dick Clark was still doing it. And after his stroke, he was very dysarthric, and he was hard to understand. And I was at a party, and there was a guy there going on and on how Dick Clark should not be doing this, and that's pathetic, and why would they have him do this? And I sat back and I was like, are you kidding me? Do you know how hard he worked to get there? And just because it makes you uncomfortable shouldn't be the reason why he can't still do his job. He's perfectly capable. So it was interesting to me to be just at an event where I didn't really know people very well, and to hear people like losing their mind over somebody who didn't sound very clear. But again, I knew how hard the man must have worked to have gotten himself to that point. So it was kind of sad for me that people just automatically felt like he should stay in the house and not communicate. And I'm like, he can still work. He can still, just because it's not the end of the world when something like that happens. It's definitely a different way of living in the world. And he was still living it. He shouldn't have to sit behind closed doors because he doesn't speak clearly anymore. So,
I mean, it's kind of a weird situation because he's also on TV, and he has millions of people listening to him. And it's kind of important for the person to be clear.
It was, and I think he was pretty clear, and he wasn't doing everything. He was doing short snapshots. But again, he was able to be understood. So it was kind of shocking to me that people just didn't. I think people were uncomfortable seeing him so different. And I think differences make people uncomfortable. And that's why I think it's so important that people share their story, because people don't realize sometimes how lucky they are. And people also don't have a lot of perspective of how sometimes other people are living their lives. So things that we think are so easy might be so difficult for somebody else. And it's not that, somebody might have a sad life. It's a different life. And as long as you can make it as best quality as you can for yourself, and have, family and friends. And I think that's a really important thing.
Yeah, it's kind of a weird time right now. You can kind of get away with speech impediment with like the American language, because we have everyone talks differently everywhere.
Like, accents, yep.
Well, not even accent, but just like cultures and like neighborhoods and stuff. So like like if you're like, I'm sure you talk more formally when you're with your students, and
exactly.
And like, let's say you're meeting your husband's parents, you like talk like
exactly.
But like, and then when you go on the street, talk a lot differently. So like, I think one big impact is that if you have a speech impediment and you like go on the street, it's not that looked down upon, because a lot of people have speech impediments, or
Mm-hmm.
they talk in slang, so it goes way more unnoticed. But if you talk in like a formal setting and you compare, like regular person to someone that has a speech impediment, the difference is so much larger,
Mm-hmm.
and that's when you see the blaring difference. So kind
Yeah,
of,
well, it's interesting because the one sound that I work with most with kids is the sound R. And if you go to Boston, people don't say R's. I will sit in the airport and cringe when I hear people calling for flights. I'm like, oh, it's that R. But again, in that area, you don't fix it. In Ireland, people with Irish accents don't really say that they TH everything. So they add THs onto words that don't have THs. So it's again, uh, it's patterns of speech and it's code switching. And they do say it's always important to be able to have that speech of power where you can speak clearly and effectively get your ideas across, but being able to switch in and out of that code is extremely important. Speaking clearly is important, but also if you're not able to speak clearly, the thing that I work with a lot is augmenting ways to communicate clearly. So speech doesn't just have to be about the verbal exchange. You can communicate in a lot of different ways. And a slow conversation with somebody using technology is just as important as being able to talk to somebody, one-on-one verbally. It's all about communication.
I mean, it's huge, but I mean, it's also a blessing we live in a world with like cell phones and
Mm-hmm.
like full size keyboards on our phones, and we can just text
Exactly.
a
When
whole.
when I first started teaching an assistive technology course, nobody knew what a QWERTY keyboard was. Because there's different kinds of keyboards when you're working with people with special needs, and QWERTY is just one. Nobody knew what a QWERTY keyboard was. So then all of a sudden I was watching TV and Verizon talked about a QWERTY keyboard. And that was the first time I heard it in like popular culture. And I was like, oh my gosh. And now like all the iPads have assistive technology. And a lot of times I'm working on a video of something that I just learned how to do on my iPhone that I didn't know how to do. And it's something where I have a hard time squeezing to take a screenshot. And I often take screenshots at work. So I found a different assistive technology way just by tapping the back of the screen and it screenshots for me. And I'm like,
The
I got
triple
it.
tap.
I just do a double tap.
Hmm.
But it's the same thing. Like I really didn't know about that. I know a lot about assistive technology for iPads, but I've never really used one for my iPhone. So I was like, oh, I didn't know I could do this. So I do a lot of assistive technology and accessibility with my students. So just trying to get them to be, again, as independent as possible so they don't have to have somebody standing over their shoulder helping them get on and off of systems and in and out of programs.
Yeah, I mean, it's great that the large companies are, especially in the beginning, they inputted like accessibility needs
Mm-hmm.
when there's no law or anything that they have to do something.
Well, I think it was a big marketing thing because the assistive technology devices can be extremely expensive. Samsung is really good at making tablets that can be incorporated with programs. But the thing is when you have some of those high tech $8,000 to $10,000 devices that have eye gaze capability, they don't often, the system is so heavy with accessibility, it doesn't really run well with Windows. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then you also get, autism was very popular around the same time iPads, not popular, but it was starting to come out a lot more. There was sort of like a big boom of people being diagnosed with autism, and iPads came out not long after that. And I think they found this market and realized that they had a tool that could actually really impact and change the lives of people, which it has done. But a lot of times people just think automatically go and get an iPad, and sometimes there's other things that are better fit. So knowing how to do that is a big part of my job, that I'm able to look at the technology that's out there, look and see the systems that it needs to run, and how I can get my kids who aren't able to activate things by touch, how I can get them to activate things how I can get them to, be able to go into Google Classroom and then go into Canvas and then, download something onto their hard drive, all without using their hands. So kids today are a lot more tech savvy than ever, but sometimes it's so many steps to do one thing. Just to save something or to open something can be like 4 or 5 steps. So you have to be able to like weigh the pros and cons of different systems.
So is Mac or PC better than for the accessibility?
I think PC has come a long way. I do think that Mac holds a little bit higher tier simply because they have more apps that work with them more seamlessly. I find that when I have kids using a PC-based system, not every app works as smoothly as you would like it to. However, that being said, school has really turned into like, the stepchild of Google Classroom, where Google Classroom is used with everything. Google and Apple are not overly friendly. So that's why certain things are extra steps to get them done. But they have to sort of work together because kids are using both systems. They're using iOS and they're using a Google platform. So making those work together, it's not always as intuitive as you would like it to be. So yeah, it can get frustrating. And certain things, like my one poor kid, whenever he's on Chrome, he can't get the full page. He can only get part of the page. So he can't see everything. So it's like little frustrations like that really can slow down your day. They're more of a hassle than something that's going to be a barrier to accessing a program or barrier to completing a task, but they're definitely barriers and they pop up from time to time. So technology, it's a blessing and a curse. And I curse at it a lot when it frustrates me because it's so frustrating.
Yeah, like I don't really have a need for that kind of assistance, but I'll watch like YouTubers do it, like this blind woman, she'll just be on her phone, like doing whatever she normally does. And it's like so amazing what she can do with it. It's just like,
yeah, and it's amazing how some programs can be very intuitive, and it's amazing. But then when you work with somebody who has atypical development or neurological differences, they don't follow the same stream of consciousness. So the things that would be very intuitive for us are not intuitive for them. So there's like a back and forth with things, but technology definitely has really opened up. I think I'm doing a lot more with kids that I don't think I could have reached years ago. But yeah, technology is definitely, it's one of my favorite things to do. And I said the other day, I had to go to the mothership because I had to get my iPhone repaired. I'm like, oh, I'm in the mothership. Here I am. But yeah, we're so dependent on it. And so when it's not working right, it's crippling.
I mean, in the past like 10 years, technology has boomed so much and helps millions and millions of lives. I think there's like 1 billion eye devices out there. And it's just an insane number to think about.
It is. I had to turn my phone in. My camera lens, I must have swung my hand out and I cracked the lens, like so much so there was like an indented hole in it. So I went and had it fixed, and I had a case on it. So I guess I just hit something right on the corner and it just smashed right into it. So I took it to get it fixed, and they said, okay, it'll be an hour. What am I going to do for an hour? So I went to the grocery store and I walked around and I'm like, oh, what time is it? And I had to look for a clock so I knew what time it was.
Oh no.
And then I was like waiting in line to pay, and I'm like, I have no. And then I went back to my car and I was like, the book is on my phone. So yeah, it's like all this, you don't realize how dependent you are on it. And it was interesting, last year, in the middle school, we never allowed the kids to have phones, and a lot of the kids were using their phones and they were showing us stuff and like showing us their TikToks. And so it kind of like opened a door, and like Zoom took me into everybody's house. And that was an interesting thing too. So, Zoom brought my students into my house. They all met my pets. Like it's definitely, it was a weird thing because I did a podcast with my friend Carice Hill, who is a great patient advocate. And she was saying for years, so many people have been saying, why can't we do distance learning? We can still be equal parts of the class. And she said, it's kind of frustrating that disabled people have been begging for this for years. However, it didn't come into effect until we had a pandemic. And I was like, well, I see the plus and minus of it. I have to be honest, virtual learning is not for everybody. Some kids did amazingly well. I think in a school of like 650, we maybe had like 20 kids who didn't do well with it. We had maybe another 200 kids who really struggled with it, but they got it done. And we had a few hundred kids that it was easy peasy. They didn't care. But I think it was such a culture shift. And when you have that culture shift on top of learning new technology, and like, I didn't have anything digital. Everything I did was more hands-on. I do a lot of board games. I do a lot of card games. I do a lot of visual stuff. I do a lot of role playing. I couldn't do that from my house. So it was using technology to sort of try and create that school experience and still give quality speech therapy. That was really a challenge. I would say I worked harder this past year than I ever did in my life. And so it's really sad when you see, things on social media about teachers, failing our kids. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I worked so hard. And I don't really know any teacher that didn't work really hard. So, it's
Not
just
the teacher's
sad.
fault. Maybe the kid is just dumb or something.
Well, you hear a lot of things. You hear a lot of things as an educator. And, I have very good friends who slam the education system, think that the teachers all failed, think that the teachers union wanted this. And I was like, we want to be in school. I would love to be in school. I admit I liked being able to sleep in. I didn't miss my commute. I liked being able to take a nap at lunch. Those were lovely things. I liked being able to walk the dog and be home with the puppy. And my kids loved meeting my dog. But it was, it was, I never worked so hard in my life. It was so stressful. It was so stressful.
Yeah. I mean, I
But
think the other thing was the whole social aspect. I think that's really
it's
it.
isolating. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Even if you're in a gym group, there's still some kind of isolation because you're not really forming any relationships. Like you're just
Right.
looking at each other, but like there's no like individual conversations or groups.
Yeah. And the other thing that I noticed is, I'm the one that I have to hunt the kids down all the time to come see me just because I'm not on their schedule. They get a pass for me. And these kids, especially my younger kids, they weren't used to checking their emails. So they had to check their emails. Then they had to figure out where my Zoom link was. And then, so it was crazy. So once we got all of that set up and we started doing it, I would be packed with kids. And I saw kids pretty much on my regular schedule. I saw kids from morning till afternoon. And then I found out that some of my colleagues, not just the speech therapists, like the speech therapists were all doing this, but some of the teachers were only seeing kids like once a day. And I was like, wait a minute. But again, that's what they were able to do things by shipping stuff out and bringing stuff back and doing videos where I was like engaging with kids all day long. So my groups were packed. I had kids who would come 3-4 times a week. And I'm like, you don't need this much speech, but I didn't turn anybody away because I was like, geez, I think they just want to interact with somebody. So I let them come.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think like the loner people are suffering the most, and then even the social people are still suffering away. But I mean, they're still, they're able to get passed by. But yeah, like the loner people,
Yeah.
sometimes, like especially when I was growing up, it's like sometimes their only interaction with people would be going to school.
Right. And you have a lot of kids, it's their only meals of the day are at school. I think that the food service workers across this country really did an amazing job getting families food. I think that schools really stepped up as a part of the community, and we're never going to make everybody happy, even when we're 100% in school. So I knew we wouldn't make everybody happy when we were 100% out of school. I just really hope that we can turn a corner soon and get back to more normal functioning. it's still pretty, it's nerve-wracking. I walked past the classroom today and it was very packed, and it's just nerve-wracking. I'm like, is it safe? I hope it's safe. I really hope it is. And I hope we keep going in this direction, because I want to see everybody back.
I mean, I just feel like everyone should go back to the way things were. And it kind of just, you can't keep just being scared of it all the time,
Yeah. And, honestly, I don't think going back to normal is probably the right thing. It's probably moving forward to a new normal, that, I connected with high school friends that I never see, but now we Zoom every once in a while. We live all around the country. We see each other, we Zoom, we have virtual happy hours, and it's fun. So do I want to do it all the time? No, but it's nice to be able to connect with those people. So I think I've always said social media is a blessing and a curse. It can be really great with reuniting you. I started my nonprofit by meeting somebody who also had the same disease I had. And we started a nonprofit, and we're going strong 10 years later. And we've done a lot of really good things. But then again, I also see where, people get bullied for their opinions. The first person I started following did a blog called, I think it was RA and the Single Chick. I think that's what it was called, something like that, or Single Girl, Single Gal, something like that. So I found her in my 30s and I was like, oh my gosh, it's like she's living my life. And it was awesome to read her. And I remember a few months later, I found this other blog called The Super Bitch. And I loved her too. I thought she was really funny. And then one day I saw the Super Bitch rip apart the Single Gal. And when I read why, it was just because they had two very different experiences. And I lost so much respect for the Super Bitch, because I was like, just because her experience isn't the same as yours doesn't mean that somebody else can't relate to it. So, I think you never know what somebody's going through. But I think, and again, I think I said this like 50 times at the We Go Health thing. Sharing the patient voice is really important because people don't hear it. You look at me, you don't think there's anything wrong with me until you see me walk and you're like, oh, that's weird. Did you hurt yourself? I can't tell you how many times I've explained that, yes, I know I'm limping, and no, I didn't sprain my ankle. People don't seem to understand, and people have no idea. So I think sharing your story, sharing people what it's, your story with what it's like living with FOP, and how you're getting out there and doing a podcast and getting your story out and talking to other patient advocates, I think it's really important. It's a simple step, but I think, a tiny ripple really puts out a larger effect as it moves forward. And it's all about that positive energy and really supporting other people and making it so that somebody like Dick Clark can go on TV. And even if he's not 100% understood, still what he said was just as valuable. And again, it's not always comfortable for everybody, but everybody has the right to communicate as much as they can. So, it's not like he was, reading the Declaration of Independence for the first time. He was cutting to a commercial break. So I think we have to see, it really bothers me. I think people get very uncomfortable when they see me limp.
Well, I hope I will replace Ryan Seacrest.
There you go. There you go. That would
Christmas
be
time.
There you go.
We're gonna drop the ball in 5, 4.
There you go. Hey, you're right there. You can swing by and cover for him when he's not in.
Yeah. Before I take the mic away from you, do you have any final words, promotions, anything you want to say?
No, if anybody would like to follow me at As My Joints Turn, it's called As My Joints Turn, my autoimmune soap opera. I just talk about my daily life, things that happen to me as a person living with a chronic illness. And I also have a nonprofit, aiarthritis.org. And we are a group that is run by patients for patients. And we work on education awareness and research, patient-centered research. We work a lot with the community and various stakeholders in this whole chronic illness community to kind of get out good information and help patients connect and learn how to better manage their diseases. So definitely reach out and follow. I'd love to have more people follow. And thank you so much for having me.
No problem. And she has a really cute dog, so follow for that.
Oh, yes. Well, she's only on Instagram. I did write a book about my other dog called Making Lemonade with Georgia Grace, because she was the ultimate chronic illness patient. So she had a huge following. And when she passed away, someone who loved her got me Finny so I could have a healthy dog. So she is my little, come here, say hi to, now she's quiet.
She was a great guest. She is, you have a new mascot.
I have my new mascot. So Finny. So my Instagram is all pretty much Finny. My TikTok is all pretty much Finny. But my blog and my Facebook page, my Twitter pages are all As My Joints Turn and AI Arthritis.
Yeah, I'll definitely put all the links below, so you're going to click on it. And thanks everyone for listening and watching, and I'll catch you later.
All right, thank you. Bye-bye.